While we all patiently wait for the mistlands update, some more patiently than others, I thought I'd mix up my gameplay with a challenge, turning this Draugr-infested village into a home fit for a Viking in only 7 in-game days. Sounds pretty easy, right? But as part of this challenge, I would also have to follow these 5 sacred rules. Firstly, I had to start the challenge with a brand new character, level 0 in all skill. Secondly, I wasn't allowed to build outside of the Draugr village's buildings. This may seem like a strange rule, but I really wanted the village to be central to this challenge. It meant there would be no base, no workbench, no fire, no bed, and only the basic starting tools, until I'd secured one of the buildings within the Draugr village. I also decided I wouldn't be able to use any cheats or exploits throughout the challenge, and finally, the village had to be returned to a livable state by dawn on the 8th day, giving me exactly 7 days and 7 nights. And yeah, I know a livable state is a bit vague, but basically all of the buildings within the village should be repaired and at least lightly decorated. I only had 7 days after all. As soon as dawn began on day 1, I made a break for the woods. My first priorities were to collect stone and wood to craft the starting tools, and to find something to eat. As I wouldn't be able to cook on a fire until I'd secured one of the village's buildings, I would have to rely on foraging off the land for the time being. It wasn't too long before I came across a few raspberry bushes and landed my first meal. Finally, I was hitting the giddy heights of 32 HP. I grabbed some flint by the river, which would come in useful later on for upgrading my workbench, and also came across a few mushrooms, which filled my second food slot. I knew I would need enough wood to build a workbench and secure and defend one of the village's buildings from the hungry Draugr, so I set to work chopping down some trees with my new axe. My first kill of the challenge was this angry little greyling, who must have been fooled by my rag clothes and low level into thinking I was an easy target. I gave it a few whacks with my new club and collected its droppings. I also took on a beefy neck and grabbed its tail for dinner, but further north I spied an area of swamp, which I definitely wasn't ready for. So I headed east instead, where I managed to sneak up on a deer and get my first deer hides. I continued on until I came across an area of black forest, where I was set upon by a gang of grey dwarf. But unfortunately for them, they're just little logs, and I had a torch. I knew I should be able to find some blueberries within the forest, so I decided it was worth a quick look around. I soon came across a burial crypt, which I marked on my map in case it came in useful later, and also a patch of blueberries, which allowed me to fill up my 3 food slots. I was, however, being pursued by enemies I wasn't sure I'd be able to take on right now, so I decided to make a dash back to the village. On my way, I managed to get some honey in exchange for a few stings, and took on a couple of boars, which dropped me some much needed meat and leather scraps, which are extremely handy for a number of craftables in the early game. Once back at the village, I began to investigate the different buildings and work out which would be the best option as my first little base camp. In total, the village had 8 buildings, including 3 halls, 4 small houses, and a tower. Obviously, ideally, I wanted a building without Draugr, and definitely without any body piles that might spew out even more Draugr. I also wanted something that would be small enough to secure and defend, but big enough to hold all of the essentials I might need early on. Somewhere near the edge of the village would also make it easier to come and go, without drawing too much attention to myself. I ruled out the northern house because of the suspicious noises and green glow inside, and the tower, because it seemed pretty well occupied, and, well, what would I even be able to fit in there? The 3 hall buildings were all too big and buzzed with the sounds of body piles, and the house in the centre, although it looked deserted, would probably prove a bit of a nightmare to get in and out of. This left 2 houses, one to the western side of the village and one to the south. I snuck around to the trees to the west of the village to get a closer look at the small house there. As it would soon start getting dark, I decided this house would be the aim. Now I just had to figure out how to get in and secure it, without dying and waking up all the way back at the stones. The house didn't have a door that I could quickly run through and shut, so I would have to get in and quickly place a workbench to allow me to access the building structures to block the doorway. Eventually, my snooping around aroused suspicion from one of the Draugr. I managed to retreat away from this one, but this other Draugr wasn't so easily fooled by my crouching. I decided it was time to create a distraction and lure it away from the house. Once they had fallen for my ruse, I made a run back for the house, before almost immediately realising I hadn't made a hammer yet. A few panicked rolls later, I crafted the hammer, selected the workbench so it'd be ready to put down, and ran back for the house. I set the workbench down and blocked the door. I soon realised why the Draugr had left this building alone, when I saw the bee's nest in the corner. Both the Draugr and the bees seemed equally unhappy to have me here, and I spent the first 5 minutes or so in my new home frantically repairing the walls while trying to avoid bee poison. It was now quickly getting dark, so I set down a fire and a couple of wooden torches as I continued to repair the walls. Now that I had a workbench, I could make several different types of weapon, even with my limited crafting materials. I decided that ranged combat would be a good strategy for this challenge, as Draugr do hit pretty hard. Luckily, I had all the materials to craft a crude bow and some arrows. Eventually the Draugr got bored and moved away from the house. I built a cooking station and began to cook some of the boar meat I'd hunted earlier. My first bit of target practice with the bow was the bee's nest, which netted me some stamina-rich honey and, more importantly, the safe use of the other half of my base. I next added a bed, which meant I wouldn't have to make the 2,000 odd meter run back to the village if I died, and used the flint to add a chopping block to upgrade my workbench. Finally, I added a chest for all of my junk and some stairs out of the roof for a quick escape, which used up the last of my wood supply. There was no time for sleeping the night away in this challenge. I needed to head out and gather more resources if I was going to finish on time. I rested by the fire to get those sweet buffs and headed up the stairs to take a look outside. I made a run for it out of the roof and across the meadows before I was hit by this BS arrow mid-roll, which took out half of my health. I narrowly missed another and darted into the trees. From the sounds of it, the Draugr had gotten distracted by some boar, and I was able to make my escape. I spent the night gathering some more leather scraps and meat and chopping trees for wood. Eventually, my axe broke. I punched the tree in rage and headed back for the village to fix it. It turned to day 2 as I approached. I snuck back to the village and saw that there were a couple of Draugr wandering outside the house. I decided it might be time to try out my new bow, as the only action it had gotten so far were the bees. Of course, a couple of misses later, I managed to get some hits in. Seems the crude bow would take some getting used to, compared to the Draugr fang I normally use in the game. I finally managed to take down my first Draugr. High on my recent victory, I started on a second, but this one had an axe, and when I saw how little damage I was doing, I lost faith and ran for the house. I repaired my tools, dropped off some supplies, cooked some meat, and rested, before heading back out for more. Although there were several Draugr outside the house, only an archer Draugr followed me, so I decided to take him and his friend on. Fortunately, Draugr archers are pretty easy to dodge, even with the mist, as long as you don't get impatient. While scouting the village earlier, I'd noticed the halls had lots of log beams for support, both inside and outside. To replace these missing beams, I would need some core wood, which comes from pine trees only found in the Black Forest. I soon came across another area of Black Forest south of the village, and got to chopping the pine trees. I was careful not to venture very far into the forest. A few grey dwarf were easy enough, but I didn't want to be taking on a troll at my current level. Once my axe broke, I headed back to the village. The mist had cleared by now, so I decided to take out another Draugr wandering around the village. I still wasn't doing very much damage with my bow, so this was quite a slow process, and I even suffered a bit of a whack, which ruined my clothes and left me a little exposed. I next decided to upgrade my hammer and axe and make myself some cute leather pants. I then headed back out to cut some more wood. For the first time, I was able to leave the house without being attacked by my hungry neighbours. Maybe I was starting to make a difference to this village after all. I should have known better. As I approached the wood, I noticed the green eyes of a Draugr heading back to the village. Something must have drawn them out. Maybe a boar or a deer. Draugr are very easily distracted by their dinner after all. And it wasn't even the only one I found in the wood. Nope, not dealing with surprise Draugr at night. I ran around to the wood on the other side of the village, where I hoped there wouldn't be any more. Day 3 began and I was feeling pretty low on progress. I continued chopping until my axe broke, and even managed to get some fine wood by rolling the birch tree logs into each other. This was way too time consuming to do too much of, but I thought it might be nice to decorate some of the buildings with banners and chairs, if there was time to at the end. When I got back to the village, there were far more Draugr wandering around than there were last night. There had obviously been a breach in one of the buildings that had allowed some Draugr to escape. At the time, I assumed it was a breach in this hall, as it was in much worse condition. But looking back at the footage, it seems that both of the halls next door were leaking Draugr. I don't know how I didn't notice this. Anyway. I ran back to my house and got a bit of a surprise. They do blend in pretty good. Luckily, I could draw it out of the village and take it down. I knew my next goal had to be to expand my real estate and secure another building in the village. The hall next door seemed an obvious choice, since it was in such bad condition that I could see right inside from the safety of my roof and shoot at things. But now I would have to clear up some of the escaped Draugr beforehand. I took on another few Draugr. This one literally became completely distracted by a boar mid-fight and just wandered off. Not that I'm complaining. I knew that if I was going to take the hall next door, I had to deal with the body pile inside first, as these body piles will spawn Draugr every 6 seconds until there are 2 within 20 meters of it. It was kind of hard to tell if I was hitting the body pile. Occasionally there would be a little splat, which means I'd hit it, but I also used some fire arrows, which would more clearly show if I'd hit it. I eventually managed to destroy it, but this had drawn some attention to me. I now had my second building. Yay! Only took 3 days. I took out the few Draugr that gathered around my house and went to my new hall to put a workbench down and get to work fixing up the walls and floors. The building was definitely in the worst state of all the buildings in the village, but I managed to get it looking alright again pretty quickly. Some of the bits I wasn't too sure about, mainly parts of the roof and chimney, so I decided I would wait to see what those bits looked like in the more complete halls, to make sure I got it right. I'd also noticed there was a rectangle of stone walls in the centre, with one missing. This was surely an area where fellow Viking had once gathered around a hearth and shared mead and food. I hadn't really considered I would need to build stone features when starting this challenge, and I had to have a think about what it would involve. Fixing the stone wall and rebuilding the hearth would be easy, as both of these are only made of stone. The problem would be in building the stone cutter to craft these stone items, which requires 2 smelted iron ingots. In order to get this iron, I would need to find both scrap iron to smelt and surtling cores to build the smelter. Surtling cores can be found quite easily in burial chambers within the Black Forest. I only needed 5, so I expected I would need to visit hopefully no more than a couple of chambers. The scrap iron, on the other hand, would be much more tricky to find. There are currently 3 different ways to get scrap iron in the game: to mine it from muddy scrap piles within the sunken crypts in the swamp, pick it up as a rare oozer drop, or to mine it from patches of muddy scrap piles buried randomly throughout the swamp. The first option is the primary method of getting scrap iron, but in order to do this, you need to have both a pickaxe to mine and the swamp key to get into the sunken crypts. Yes, there is a chair or digging exploit to get into these crypts, but I felt like using these exploits would not be in keeping with the rules of the challenge. You get the materials to build a pickaxe from defeating the first Forsaken boss, Eikthyr, which would be very doable, even at my low level. And you get the swamp key from defeating the second boss, the Elder, which would be much trickier, but could potentially be done. The other 2 ways of getting scrap iron relied a lot more on chance. Oozers themselves are pretty rare, being found occasionally just outside sunken crypts. Other than that, I'd only be able to find them at night in the swamps. The swamps is not somewhere someone as squishy as me wants to be by day, but at night it gets much worse. The underground muddy scrap piles are also pretty rare. I've tried locating them with a wishbone before, which you get from defeating the 4th boss, Meadows, and only come across a few patches in quite a big swamp. You can even use a 2-handed club like the Stagbreaker or Frostner to detect for this scrap iron from the surface. but it doesn't always seem reliable. This method would basically be like looking for a needle in a haystack, if that haystack was also full of scary monsters trying to kill you. So that was the plan. Get the Surtling cores, kill Eikthyr, kill the Elder, and mine some scrap iron. And I had to try and get it all done within 2 days max, if I had any hope of completing the challenge on time. I still had 4 buildings to clear of Draugr, and I hadn't finished renovating any of the 8 buildings. Even my own base still didn't have a door or roof. I decided to start with the burial chambers, and getting those 5 Surtling cores. I knew my bow wouldn't come in too handy in these tight chambers, so I used some extra resources I had to craft the Stagbreaker Club. This weapon deals a lot of blunt damage, which skeletons are weak to, but also has really good knockback, which will come in handy in the cramped dark chambers. While heading towards the burial chamber I'd marked on my map earlier, I came across another. I dodged the skeletons guarding it and headed inside. The Stagbreaker was fantastic at taking out the skeletons, but after I fully explored the chamber and was very nearly taken out by a ghost, I was only rewarded with 2 Surtling cores, as it turned to day 4. I next headed straight for the chamber I'd spotted earlier. I quickly came across the 3rd Surtling core, and many skeletons and mushrooms later, I hit the jackpot. If only I'd come here first, eh? I took the 2 remaining that I needed and headed back to the village. Once rested, I crafted some arrows and upgraded my bow, before heading off to find Eikthyr. I knew there would be a boss stone to find Eikthyr at the sacrificial stones, so I headed there. On my way, I came across a boss stone for the Elder, which showed me I'd be able to find the next boss a bit west of the village. This meant I'd be able to stop off at my base on the way to the Elder in order to repair my weapons and re-rest. I also came across a maypole on my travels, and decided if I couldn't have it, nobody could. Luckily, I did manage to run into one of Eikthyr's altars, just west of the starting stones. I made the sacrifice and summoned Eikthyr. I was able to make quite short work of this boss with my bow, as its attacks are pretty easy to dodge and don't do very much damage. It turned to day 5 just as I defeated Eikthyr. Only 3 days left. Now that I had the material for the antler pickaxe, I decided to run that little bit extra east to put the trophy up on the sacrificial stones, so that I would be able to use Eikthyr's power for the rest of the challenge. I then made my way back to the village to get myself ready for the Elder. On my way back, I destroyed a few grey dwarf nests and picked up the 3 ancient seeds I would need to summon the Elder. Once back at the house, I rested, repaired everything, and crafted the new antler pickaxe, as well as a smart leather tunic and helmet, which I hoped would be adequate enough to protect me from the Elder's attacks. Looking again at the waypoint on the map, the Elder seemed pretty far away, and I was suspicious that it might be on a different landmass. Just to be safe, I packed enough material to build a raft if needed. I headed west towards the Elder, and it soon seemed that my suspicions were correct. I walked towards the ocean and opened up the menu to build a raft. And it was at this very moment that I realised by building a raft, I would have to build it. I don't know how it took until this moment, but it did. After a little despair pause, I continued up the coast to see if the landmasses joined up further north, but I wasn't very optimistic. I was going to have to try and get the scrap iron another way. I was following the land back towards the village, where I'd spotted some swamp before. Plan A was out the window. Time to look for some oozers. It was still night time, so there would still be a chance of me finding an oozer, but I was going to have to stay relatively close to the outskirts if possible, as dying and having to retrieve my stuff would lose me so much of the precious time I had left to finish the challenge. Once at the swamps, I was immediately approached by some skeletons. I took out the Stagbreaker, first one down, ran towards the second one, and I could hardly believe it. Was this hope? Was this a sign from the Allfather himself? Was it just because the trees are very hard? No, it had to be this. I was going to finish this damn challenge. I was so stunned, I didn't even notice the wraith coming towards me. Luckily, I could lure it out of the swamps, into the Black Forest, and into a few grey dwarf. A bit spooky, but I managed to get it down. I headed back towards the swamp to get digging. But after spotting another wraith, I decided to wait on the outskirts for a couple of minutes until dawn, when it would despawn. As soon as the 6th day kicked off, I tried the club again. Phew, it wasn't a hallucination. I got my pickaxe out and started digging. The buried scrap pile wasn't as easy to find as I thought, and even though I was near the edge of the swamp, my mining was attracting a fair few visitors, most of which I was able to lure out the forest to take down. Some made it even easier for me. I knew the scrap pile would be relatively close to the surface, so I extended the hole and eventually hit muddy gold and got the 2 bits of scrap iron I needed. I wasted no time getting the hell out of there and back to the village. Even after this little victory, there was still a ton of work to do, and less than 2 days to do it all. Once back, I rested, ate, and fixed all my stuff, before going to take down the only Draugr left wandering around the village. I built the smelter in the hall I cleared, and added the scrap iron, as well as some coal from food I'd left on the fire too long. And in no time at all, the first bit of iron popped out. Now that the streets were clear, I felt safe enough to do some repairing on the empty houses, and started with the one in the centre. I kept the decor pretty simple, mostly because I had limited time and resources, but it would do. Everything a fellow Viking might need. First building, fully complete. It took long enough. I decided it would next be best to clear out some more buildings before night fell. I started with the house to the north of the village next to the tower. From my earlier recon, it didn't sound like there was a body pile inside, but definitely at least a few Draugr. I was able to take the first out without too much trouble. The second obviously thought they could get an easier meal somewhere else. Again, not that I'm complaining. Inside the house were some flint head arrows, which would come in handy as more damaging alternatives to the wooden arrows I was mostly using. Before fixing up the house, I wanted to take another haul. From the buzzing noise, there was definitely a body pile in here I would have to try and prioritise. Inside, there seemed to be at least 4 regular Draugr and a Draugr elite, my first of the challenge. I only got a couple of shots on the body pile before the Draugr rushed me. After a few dodges, I stupidly ran low on stamina, went to dodge and... First death. Guess this won't be a no-death run. When I woke up, I couldn't even rest since the rain had put out my fire. I guess I still hadn't got round to building a roof. Oops. I snuck back to my grave, ate, and equipped my armour and bow. I got to work hunting down the Draugr that killed me. However, this was drawing out new Draugr that were spawning in the hall, including the Draugr elite, who seemed to have busted his way out the back somehow. Without being able to rest, combined with the wet effect debuffs from the rain, my stamina was regenerating very slowly. I tried to run away, but the Draugr elite and archer were pretty persistent. Eventually, I was hit, but at least there was no skill drain this time. When I woke up, I grabbed my stuff and immediately went back to the house to build a quick makeshift chimney so that I could rest. But it was now night time, so I would have both the wet effect and cold effect debuffs to contend with. I quickly managed to take out the Draugr and Draugr elite, along with another new Draugr that had spawned. I knew with the door to the hall open, allowing Draugr to leave, the body pile would continue to spew out Draugr. I went back to try and take out the body pile, but unfortunately, as I was shooting it, another Draugr elite spawned, followed by a 1-star Draugr. The Draugr elite at least seemed like it was stuck, but the 1-star Draugr came for me. Being rested was really making all the difference in this fight, and I was able to keep my distance and take it down pretty easy, even without my pants equipped. One more arrow finally took out the body pile, and I just had the Draugr elite and a new Draugr till the second hall was clear. The Draugr elite eventually managed to unstick itself, but I led it out into the meadows and distracted it by running towards and sacrificing a Grey Dwarf. Rest in peace, Grey Dwarf. Once it was defeated, the second hall was now clear. Yay! I set down a workbench and some standing torches, which led me to notice some chests hidden under the floorboards. Nice. I emptied and destroyed the chest, as I would need every bit of wood I could get, and got back to work. This hall was in much better condition than the first, and wasn't really missing much apart from the chimney and hearth. Once I was done repairing the insides, I headed back to my base house to get some more supplies. On the way, I decided to give taking out the Draugr at the top of the tower a go. I took out the two at the top, and then went over to start repairing it. But it became clear that there was still an archer inside. I took 2 arrows, probably because I was rushing, and managed to take it down, just as it turned to dawn on the 7th day. Only 1 day left. Now, only one more building in the village to clear. The last hall. I put down a workbench in the tower, and got to fixing it up. But while I was repairing it, I suddenly heard a Draugr, which must have escaped from the last hall. In my panic, I tried to get out, but was dead with a couple of whacks. Ugh, more skills lost. I rested up and snuck around the village back to my grave. The Draugr was still waiting for me outside, but I was able to take it down pretty easy. I finally noticed the hole in the last hall, which had definitely been leaking Draugr onto the streets for the last few days. I took shots at the body pile and the couple of Draugr inside. Eventually, I managed to get the body pile and take out the last Draugr, leaving only a Draugr elite remaining. Fortunately for me, he was pretty stuck on the little platform. A bit of an anticlimactic ending for the Draugr of this village, but I didn't mind. I still had a lot of work to do, and not very much time to do it. I put down the workbench and got to work repairing everything. This hall was in by far the best condition, all the way down to the wooden beams and chimney, which would be very helpful as a guide when putting the finishing touches on the other halls. There were also a few chests under the floorboards here, which I pillaged and destroyed for 3 wood each. I headed back to the first hall to collect the last bit of iron for the stone cutter. It was time to get the hearths down. Luckily, I'd collected more than enough stone along the way to build one in each of the halls. I next finished off the other 2 little houses in the village, again with pretty simple decor. However, now I was completely out of wood, and still had quite a bit of the halls and my own house to finish. I chopped down a couple of trees behind the village and used this to replace the lower roofs around the halls. I soon realised I'd seriously underestimated how many of the log beams needed to be replaced to finish the exterior of the halls. I was going to have to head back to the Black Forest for some more core wood. Not ideal, considering it was already going dark, and once night fell, I would only have 9 real-life minutes to finish everything before dawn. I chopped some pine trees and just barely made it out of there with my life. I ran back to the village with what I hoped was enough core wood to finish the challenge. The next 6 or so minutes were a bit of a blur, and just involved me frantically running around the village, building and repairing with no kind of order whatsoever. It also won't surprise you to hear that waiting until the last night to finish the roofs and chimneys was a mistake. I could hardly see anything up here. As it became light, I knew dawn was probably seconds away. Suddenly I remembered I hadn't finished the roof on top of my house. I ran back and got the few pieces of roof down before it turned to day 8. The challenge was over. In total, I'd fully repaired 3 of the 4 houses and all 3 of the halls, but I didn't quite finish off my own house, and I'd also completely forgotten to repair the top of the tower. Plus, looking around at some of my handiwork, there were a couple of mistakes with the other buildings, which mostly can be put down to the last minute rush and doing a lot of the work at night. So I guess technically I had unfortunately failed the challenge. Nice. But nevertheless, it was pretty good fun to change up how I played the game, and I'm personally pretty happy with how much I was able to complete, considering the many time-costly mistakes I made along the way. If you enjoyed this challenge, please leave a like and comment, and consider subscribing to see more Valheim videos from me in the future. Maybe you'll even like this Valheim guide I made. Until the next one, have a great day.